So virtual reality is increasingly being used as a social tool, also in medicine and in psychological research. Why do you think virtual reality is able to be useful for those with different research interests? And can you give a few examples?
Yeah, of course. That's
It's
basically what I
research,
do.
yeah.
So I've been using VR. I started, as I said, in psychotherapy for social phobia. So basically, the whole concept is based on that. If you're too anxious to interact with another person, then it's probably less scary for you to interact with a virtual character instead. But they can do that in virtual reality, so you really have sort of your senses immersed in that interaction, so that you would experience the kind of anxiety you would have the same as when interacting with a real person. But in this occasion, you know everything is controlled, you know there's no risk, and you can practice, you can go through it as many times as possible, maybe even with a therapist as well, so that you can learn how to sort of conquer your anxiety, how to build your confidence, how to sort of perfect your social skills. So that's where I started. But I'll be also using VR in medical training. I mean, there are people using VR in medical simulation where they train surgeons to operate on patients, but I've been using VR in training for communication as well, for doctors to be able to, under pressure, but still deliver the correct message to the patients. And sometimes that's a lot harder, a lot easier said than done. And I've also been working with psychologists and social neuroscientists in using virtual reality, generating virtual characters, and use them as a stimuli to study how people react in a social interaction. And we can control these avatars really well. So they look really sort of alive, but at the same time, we can program them to do exactly what they do and how they do it. So we can control how high their arm is going to go and how many times, right? If you get a real actor to do it, they will be really bored and they will not be as accurate as they could. So we can understand a sort of certain low level brain function, how do they actually operate. And we can compare the difference between, say, people with some kind of neurological disorder, like for instance, autism. How do they react differently than a normal person under different very well-controlled conditions, so we can have a better understanding of what could have caused this condition and what can we possibly do to help them to improve.
What ties all of these together in a sense is that they're all about giving people experiences that would either be impossible or very difficult in real physical life. So whether it's medical education, you can't sort of let a trainee loose on a real patient. Sometimes they work with medical students work with actors, but you can't get that much contact with an actor to get that experience. Or in psychology, with a real person, you can't so tightly control their behavior as you need to for a scientific experiment. You can't prove that their behavior will be identically the same for every single participant. So there's lots of these experiences which you couldn't create for real, but it's very valuable to be able to give people, particularly in education.
Yeah, and everything is all supported by this immersive experience those modern VR displays could give you. So we're really getting your real reaction from this, and there are lots of scientific evidence supporting that, which is kind of the base of our work. Really.
If you play a game on screen, you're not going to really respond as you do in real life, but in VR you're much more likely to.
Yeah.
It's much more likely to feel as it does. If you're, as in Sylvia's example, work where doctors had training in dealing with difficult patients, it's just not as stressful as immediate in watching it on screen. You're like watching a TV program, you're watching a soap opera. If it's in VR, you've got this patient in front of you. You've got to deal with her. You've got to deal with her anger in a way that's much more similar to real life.
And it's really interesting because we've together run probably hundreds of participants so far. And the really interesting thing is very often we have participants who were surprised of what they've done in VR. I was like, I didn't know why I did it. That was really strange, So and that just happens all the time.
And to having really sort of strong responses.
Exactly. They were completely not expecting and they couldn't explain it, and it's been fun.